The year is 1987, and the Great American Broadcasting's acquisition of Hanna-Barbera from Taft Broadcasting would be felt throughout the studio. We would also see the effects of this new ownership as well. I will explain shortly. Up to this point, Hanna-Barbera were on a roll. They brought out Pac-Man, which was quite successful at the time due to the video game being a monstrous hit in arcades. Also, they would revive the Jetsons with a second season and Johnny Quest in 1984 and 1986, respectively. Super Friends would also get an eighth season iteration called the Superpowers Team Galactic Guardians in 1985. Hanna-Barbera continued their presence with the Fantastic World of Hanna-Barbera, which was formerly known as Hanna-Barbera's World of Super Adventure. Told you I would get to it shortly. Hanna-Barbera would have both networks on lock with their output, but it wasn't as nearly as fruitful as it was in the 70s, considering syndicated cartoons were gaining a massive foothold in the animation space by the midpoint of the 80s. But when Great American Broadcasting came into the picture, something was brewing. So, what was the purpose of this acquisition? Well, according to Iwao Takamoto, who was Hanna-Barbera's super talented character designer and a figure that was instrumental in their success, he would go on to say that Great American Broadcasting Company bought Hanna-Barbera Studios so they could possibly sell it off to the highest bidder down the line. So, what was their game plan? Well, it was to bolster Hanna-Barbera's catalog so it would be quite enticing to potential buyers. In other words, pump out more product. As you can imagine, in order to do this, they unfortunately had to go back to recycling characters from the past. Mind you, they already did it a year prior of the acquisition with the Flintstone Kids in 1986. This one was a cartoon that made Hanna-Barbera do something they never really did, rip off another cartoon's concept. Let me explain. See, around that time, CBS was still having a flourishing Saturday morning cartoon lineup. In 1984, an interesting cartoon would make its way to television on September 15th, 1984. The cartoon that I speak of is none other than the Muppet Babies. This would be a take on the Muppets characters that were already riding high off the box office success of the Muppets Take Manhattan in July of that same year. To make a long story short, Muppet Babies became a huge hit on CBS and would make its return the following year. Hanna-Barbera had seen that success and the Flintstone Kids was born. Now, why did I mention the Flintstones Kids? Well, let me say that the Flintstones Kids wasn't a huge hit for them and only lasted 24 episodes. Hanna-Barbera also started to fully commit to the world of outsourced animation with their output for the fantastic world of Hanna-Barbera. They would make Sky Commanders under that umbrella and Skedaddle, a game show no less. Speaking of the fantastic world of Hanna-Barbera, this would be quite the hit for them on the syndicated side of things. It had proved to be so popular at the time that it was bumped up to 4.5 hours in 1986 and then 5 hours in 1987. Housing many outsourced anime shows like GoBots, The Further Adventures of Super Ted, Yogi's Treasure Hunt, and Galtar certainly helped out Hanna-Barbera. But despite the success of the fantastic world of Hanna-Barbera in syndication, their output after the acquisition weren't as fruitful as they imagined it would be. There were only two new properties under the new merger. Now, did you notice that I never mentioned a Scooby Doo series after the 13 Ghosts of Scooby Doo? Well, there's a good reason for that. See, after that series, Scooby Doo wouldn't appear with a cartoon on Saturday mornings for a while, and it would remain that way after. But even this wouldn't be for long. Remember, they were now owned by Great American Broadcasting at this point, so Hanna-Barbera had to dig up and recycle something. Scooby Doo would get this treatment on September 10th, 1988. Hanna-Barbera decided to give us a new take on Scooby Doo, unlike anything they had done before.
Scooby Doo, Scooby Doo, Scooby Doo, Scooby Doo. There's a mystery in town.
Here it is. After a 4-year hiatus from Saturday mornings, Scooby Doo returned to his rightful place once again with a pup named Scooby Doo. This outing was quite different. First off, they decided that they wanted to distance themselves from the failed reception of the 13 Ghosts of Scooby Doo had gotten. So, unfortunately, Scrappy Doo would not make a return in this iteration. But this was for good reason. See, a pup named Scooby Doo would be a sort of a prequel series to Scooby Doo, Where Are You? Apparently, Hanna-Barbera thought they had something with the Flintstone kids. And around this time, Muppet Babies had just entered its 4th season on CBS and continued to be a ratings hit for the network. The babyfication of classic characters was now the new fad in animation. So Hanna-Barbera returned to this idea again. A pup named Scooby-Doo was unlike any Scooby-Doo cartoon before it. This time, the gang were now school children who lived in a town called Coolsville, going out, solving mysteries, and of course, getting into mystery solving hijinks. And I still bear the same question as I did before about these kids. Now, when these kids went to school instead of hanging out at night is beyond my comprehension. Anyway, this one was more of a self parody of Scooby Doo, Where Are You, than something like the Flintstones kids. It would pay homage to Tex Avery cartoons, as the characters would react with exaggerated outtakes. Everything was definitely tongue in cheek in this iteration. From Velma's frequent use of the word jinkies,
Chinkies, 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 Chinkies. Good work, Scooby. Thanks, Velma.
to Daphne's obsession with fashion, being prissy, and not getting her clothes dirty,
I'm getting sick too. This sewer is loaded with cooties.
to even Fred being completely oblivious and always blaming Red Herring, the show's bully, for every crime that happened.
Well, that's Red Herring. I'll bet he's working with Chickenstein.
You're a real featherbrain, Jones. That's not very funny.
This iteration definitely turned the Scooby Doo formula on its head. Even when the gang got chased by a villain, a 1950s style ditty would play out in a montage. A pup named Scooby Doo was definitely going for humor this time around. Gone was the dark atmosphere of the 13 Ghosts of Scooby Doo. In was lots of zaniness. The target audience was definitely for kids. First off, Scooby Doo was now a puppy, hence the title of the show. And Shaggy was now a kid who loved comic books and video games. But it seemed that their love for food remained the same. You can say that A Pup Named Scooby Doo was definitely a product of its time. This was a cartoon definitely made for kids of that era. It was a reimagining of the Scooby Doo lore that surprisingly resonated with the audience, it would actually get 4 seasons on ABC. But besides A Pup Named Scooby-Doo and the new Yogi Bear show, Hanna-Barbera hadn't produced any new properties. But Hanna-Barbera's fortunes would soon change as they went into the 90s. On October 29th, 1991, the Great American Broadcasting Company had found that buyer they were seeking out. The buyer would be none other than Turner Broadcasting. They would end up buying the entire studio and its catalog for a whopping $320 million. Something interesting would come out of this ordeal. But little did we all know, this would be the final frontier for Hanna-Barbera. Hanna-Barbera had entered the 90s in decent fashion. Now, whereas the 80s animated space was mostly about merchandising with toy line driven cartoons, the 90s animated space was quite different. By this time, everybody were in the anime space producing work. Plus, a new network would come into the Saturday morning cartoon race, Fox, with the fledgling Fox Kids cartoon block. Also, cartoons had reached to cable networks full-time as well, and began to have their own cartoon blocks. In other words, it was about beating the competition, and oh boy, was it heavy. Hanna-Barbera knew they would have to play ball harder than they ever had before, and keep up with the competition. Luckily, Turner would whip them into shape. The head of Turner Broadcasting, Ted Turner, definitely meant business. See, he already had established himself as a major player cable network game with CNN, TBS, and TNT. So this is a man who knew his way around the television business. His mission? To create another channel, but not any regular channel. No, this time it would be a channel that played only cartoons for 24 hours a day. He would use Hanna-Barbera's entire catalog and build his new channel around it. As we know by this point, Hanna-Barbera had an enormous body of work, so this would be a match made in heaven for kids and cartoon lovers alike. Turner Broadcasting and Hanna-Barbera would take it to the next level. But before the buyout had emerged, Hanna-Barbera would deliver shows such as Wake, Rattle, and Roll in syndication, a return to live-action animation hybrid, something last seen with the Banana Splits. This one housed 2 segments, Fender Bender 500, which was something we didn't see in a long time from Hanna-Barbera. This was a sequel of sorts to Wacky Races, where the racers drove monster trucks, and another segment called Monster Tales, which was about a group of pets living in a Transylvanian castle that belonged to their masters. The gimmick here, though, was that their masters were actually classic movie monsters, such as Frankenstein, Dracula, and Dr. Jekyll. This show also had another distinction as well. It played earlier in the morning in syndication. Unfortunately, it would only last a year in syndication. Because it would be moved to the Disney Channel. Yes, Disney Channel in 1991. So, this makes it the only Hanna-Barbera series to ever be broadcasted on the Disney Channel. But when the series made the jump to Disney, they unfortunately had to change the title of the show. it would be changed to Jump, Rattle, and Roll. This was due to the show not being shown in the morning anymore, but instead in the afternoons. As for NBC, they would also get some Saturday morning offerings, such as 1990's Gravedale High, which was quite similar to Monster Tales, but this time it was set in a school, a high school for monsters. And their teacher? None other than Rick Moranis. You know, Louis Tilly from Ghostbusters? And he would come fresh off the success of the movie Honey, I Shrunk the Kids a year prior. NBC and Hanna-Barbera built this cartoon series around him. It would only last 13 episodes, though. Not a huge success. NBC. Yeah. Anyway, the biggest resurrected property from Hanna-Barbera would be something they would be quite familiar with. The one that established their name in the animation space.
It's the Tom and Jerry Kids. Gotta be there where all the action is. Tom and Jerry Kids. The Tom and Jerry Kids show.
This would be the cartoon that would start Turner Broadcasting and Hanna-Barbera's partnership. Tom and Jerry Kids. It would make its debut on September 8th, 1990 on the newly, at the time, Saturday morning cartoon block, Fox Kids. Once again, they would employ the babyfication concept to Tom and Jerry. Since this was the 90s, things had changed, but mostly stayed the same. First off, Tom and Jerry were young, of course. Tom would sport a red baseball cap to signify that Tom had tood, which was starting to become big around the time. And Jerry had a bow tie. But despite the change in looks, they were still up to their usual antics. You know, Tom chasing Jerry around. Also, they would bring back Spike and his son Tyke and Droopy and his son Dripple as segments. It was a hit for the new network's Saturday morning lineup. It would last 4 seasons on Fox Kids, but it would be in 1991 that Hanna-Barbera would kickstart anew. First off, let's start on ABC, The Pirates of Darkwater. This cartoon would be very different from anything they have ever done. For this outing, they partnered with David Kirshner, who wrote the 1986 animated classic An American Tail. This would be a cartoon that dismissed everything Hanna-Barbera was known for at this point. The story was very dark, no pun intended. It involved a young prince named Ren who lived on an alien planet called Mir. The planet was being enveloped in a substance called dark water that plagued seas across the world. To stop it, he had to find the 13 treasures of Ru. He was accompanied by a woman named Tula, a monkey-bird hybrid called Niddler, and a treasure-loving pirate, Eos. They had to fight off the villainy of Bloth, the evil pirate lord who seeked the treasures for himself. Unfortunately, it would only last 1 season on ABC, but it would be picked up in syndication and put on the Fantastic World of Hanna-Barbera the following year. Then they would release the unsuccessful Yo Yogi on NBC. This was their last attempt with the babyfication concept, and unfortunately, Yogi's last time on television. This was all before the merger with Turner Broadcasting. Now, what would come after it? Well, it wouldn't start out great with the merger. See, with the success of The Simpsons on Fox at the time, ABC decided that they wanted to get into the newly revived adult animation space. They had every right to do so. They had the very first primetime network cartoon with the Flintstones, so they had some advantage. Hanna-Barbera were on task to give them their return to the realm, and CBS also decided that they wanted a piece of that pie as well. ABC and CBS would premiere Capital Critters and Fish Police on January 28, 1992 and February 28, 1992, respectively. So, could they bring that magic back again? No. Let's definitely make this a long story short. Both of these shows were very, very unsuccessful. Fish Police only lasted 6 episodes before it was canceled, and Capital Critters barely made it past 13 episodes. The Simpsons was starting to become a juggernaut by this time, so there wasn't any effort that could put a dent in their reign in primetime animation. It's safe to say that Hanna-Barbera never came back to primetime television again. It didn't matter because daytime is where Hanna-Barbera mostly strived at. They would come with the Addams Family that same year on ABC. This would capitalize off the success of the 1991 film adaptation of the Addams Family. Speaking of film, Hanna-Barbera would revive a property that made them a household name in the first place, in a way no one had seen coming.
Wilma, I'm home!
This summer, from Universal Pictures and Amblin Entertainment.
On May 27th, 1994, Universal Pictures would collaborate with Hanna-Barbera to release The Flintstones. Yes, a live-action movie of The Flintstones. Considering that The Flintstones were already a hot commodity due to the various branding it had on products such as Flintstones vitamins and Fruity and Cocoa Pebbles cereal, it seemed right for them to make their return, and return they had. First off, the budget for the film would be $46 million. And from the look of the production, you could see how well it was spent. They had managed to recreate the whole cartoon atmosphere of the cartoons in live action, even down to the talking appliances that had dinosaurs in them. Every aspect of the animated series was intact here. Second, the casting was quite remarkable. First, you had John Goodman as Fred Flintstone. Mind you, he was already on a highly successful sitcom on the same channel that the Flintstones ironically appeared on years prior. I speak of the sitcom Roseanne. So his comedic chops were on display, and to great effect. He was literally Fred Flintstone. All his mannerisms, his quirks, his misgivings, all of it, he captured it perfectly. Then you had Rick Moranis as Barney Rubble. I already mentioned Rick before, but around the same time, he was coming off the success of the 1992 sequel to Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Honey, I Blew Up the Kid. The same thing that I said about John Goodman's performance applies to Rick Moranis'. He was literally Barney Rubble in the flesh, down to the T. Rounding out the cast would be Elizabeth Perkins as Wilma Flintstone and Rosie O'Donnell as Betty Rubble, who was gaining waves of her own at this time with the success that 1992's A League of Their Own had gained. Even Halle Berry and the late great Elizabeth Taylor had roles in this movie. This movie couldn't fail with the kind of star power that it had. Fortunately, it didn't, because the film would garner a whopping $341.6 million at the box office, despite the critics basically hating the film. In all, it was a huge hit for Hanna-Barbera at the time. But they were already getting the ball rolling a year prior, starting with 1993's Two Stupid Dogs, which was obviously Hanna-Barbera's take on the wildly successful Ren and Stimpy show that aired on Nickelodeon at the time. The cartoon would also mark the return of Secret Squirrel in his own segment called Super Secret Squirrel. Unfortunately, Two Stupid Dogs would also be notable for another thing as well. See, it would be the first Hanna-Barbera cartoon to appear mostly on cable television, as it made its premiere on TBS. This and SWAT Kats, which was different as well. These two cartoons would be marginal successes, but it would mark a drastic change within the company and the way they produced cartoons. In other words, they were moving away from the space they made their home. Syndicated and network television. The Hanna-Barbera of old was becoming nothing but a memory. This would cause a bit of strife between Turner Broadcasting and Hanna-Barbera Studios. Things would change even more.
Say, what's this? Cartoon Network. Groovy.
Here it is, Cartoon Network. This is the place where Hanna-Barbera's catalog would reside at. It would be established in October 1992 as a channel, but all of their shows were classic Hanna-Barbera cartoons from their catalog. Turner made sure they got the most of their investment. Turner wanted more out of them. In 1995, it would begin Hanna-Barbera's output on the 3-year-old network. By this time, the fantastic world of Hanna-Barbera was gone from airwaves, so the output on syndicated television had ceased. Cartoon Network would be their new home. So what was their mission? To bring in a new generation of animators. And they sure did with right here. This would be the breeding ground for new content for the network. Also, this would be the first time that Hanna-Barbera would stray away from network and syndicated television. This was definitely a new frontier for the studio. With What a Cartoon, the network was trying to become a major player in the animation space. Think about it. Before Cartoon Network, cartoons were only shown on Saturday morning and in weekday syndication. Also, the Disney Channel and Nickelodeon had shown animation as well, but what Cartoon Network were doing here would be absolutely revolutionary. This was a channel that promised to show cartoons 24 hours a day. Cartoon Network was a kid's dream come true. Cartoon Network as a whole should be touched upon in a future episode. There's more to the story that I'm letting on. But for the context of this episode, let's just say that this is when Cartoon Network started to make waves. To make their presence known, they had to get back to what they did best. Make animation. They need an avenue to introduce the audience to something new and fresh. Lo and behold, What a Cartoon would make its premiere on February 20th, 1995. This series is where we would start to be introduced to the future of Hanna-Barbera, Cartoon Network Studios. More on that later. Anyway, the show was catered like a showcase, a festival of sorts. 3 cartoons were shown in a half-an-hour episode. Long story short, the show would instantly have a profound effect on the network. Remember when I said this was a breeding ground for new content? Well, it would also be the breeding ground for new talent as well. This show would give these cartoons an avenue to branch out on their own. Thus, the new generation of animators would emerge from the trenches. First up the bat, we have Genndy Tartakovsky with his creation, Dexter's Laboratory. It would make its premiere on April 27th, 1996. With this cartoon, you instantly could see what direction Hanna-Barbera was going in. It was a cartoon that was quite sophisticated. Dexter was a boy genius who had his own laboratory in his basement. Dexter was quite the character. He was intelligent, but he would always fail at his experiments due to being careless. Also, having an older sister like Dee Dee certainly didn't help things out. She was good-hearted but quite oblivious as she always played around in his laboratory, wrecking his stuff in the process. Then you had Mandark, his nemesis, who always tried to best Dexter since Dexter's inventions were always better than his. The show also had 2 segments as well. The first one was Dial M for Monkey, which was Dexter's pet monkey who was actually a superhero and went out to save the day when Dexter left the lab. And Justice Friends, which was a spoof of the Avengers. Trust me, if you ever see it, it's very obvious. Dexter's Laboratory became Cartoon Network's first true hit. Winning 3 Emmy Awards is proof enough. Gendy would go on to great things, but I will save that for another day. In the same year Dexter's Laboratory came, a Hanna-Barbera legend would make its return to television for a new audience to marvel at. On August 26, 1996, Hanna-Barbera's prodigal son would step into the 90s to grace us with new adventures. Oh, sorry, I mean real adventures. So why was it called Real Adventures of Jonny Quest? Well, first off, this iteration would be far removed from the 1980s revival that preceded it. This one would employ CG animation for its Quest World scenes. Now, you have to remember, this was the early 90s, so to put it in that context, the CG was basically in its infancy, especially on television. It was only seen before in cartoons such as ABC's Reboot and Transformers Beast Wars, and in video games such as Donkey Kong Country. At the time, it was all the rage, and in tried and true fashion, Hanna-Barbera would employ it. But even this claim would be selling it short, because where Jonny Quest succeeded at was the storytelling. As for the show itself, Hanna-Barbera brought the show into the modern day. First off, Jonny Quest was now a teenager, and he was still accompanied by Haji, who was also a teenager as well. Bandit was still around as well, but they were joined by a new member of the group, Jessie Bannon. Yes, Race's daughter. Also, the writing team employed various drawing techniques and locales to make the show feel real. This extended to the plots of the episodes themselves, where they were thrust into stories that had real-life situations. Hanna-Barbera and Turner Broadcasting really wanted the show to succeed. Big marketing campaigns, and it aired on Cartoon Network, TBS, and TNT. Yes, it played 21 times a week. They definitely went the extra mile for this outing, even employing 7 different animation studios to do the animation, and it showed. The show was quite beautiful. The Real Adventures of Jonny Quest aired for 2 seasons for 52 episodes. Next, we would get another cartoon greenlit from Water Cartoon in 1997.
Man, I'm pretty. Do the monkey with me. Come on.
Next, we would have Van Partible step up to the plate with his creation, Johnny Bravo. Let me say that this one was definitely different for Hanna-Barbera. Despite Johnny Bravo being technically a kid's cartoon, Johnny was, sketchy to say the least. Johnny Bravo was a character who resembled Elvis Presley, but he was always trying to come on to women with disastrous results.
No, but how'd you like to hang out and watch my blanket with me?
I'd rather be hit by a meteorite.
Believe it or not, it was actually tame. Some of the time. Butch Hartman would go on record to say that Cartoon Network was very lenient on the content that was on their channel. His assessment was that many people weren't watching Cartoon Network at the time, so they could be flexible with how they presented their cartoons. Makes sense considering cable viewership was so spread out wide due to the volume of channels on cable. Also, the concept of Cartoon Network was still fairly new to audiences. At least the show would pay homage to Hanna-Barbera by actually having cameos of various characters from their catalog appear in episodes. In fact, Joe Barbera would be actively involved with the production as a creative consultant for Johnny Bravo and mentored Van Partible as well. Johnny Bravo would be another hit for Cartoon Network. This would be followed by the next offering from the What a Cartoon series, which would be called Cartoon Cartoons by this time. And that cartoon would be known as Cow and Chicken. If you thought the leniency on Johnny Bravo was overboard, Cow and Chicken definitely had it beat by a long shot. This one would come from David Fleiss, by the way. Out of the shorts that were on Cartoon Cartoons, Cow and Chicken was their most popular and would soon get greenlit after that initial outing on What a Cartoon. The premise, you may wonder? Well, Cow and Chicken involved cow and chicken. Well, that was obvious. But there's more to that. These two often got into comedic situations while being antagonized by the big red guy. Just look at him. You can see how lenient Cartoon Network was from this character alone. Let's get this out of the way. That's the devil. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. That's the devil. And in tried and true fashion, would try to lead them into temptations and scam them by posing as different people. On top of that, he would show off his rear end, literally his butt. So it's easy to say that the humor of the show leaned on the gross side of things, to say the least, and that it did. Cow and Chicken was quite juvenile in nature. It was something audiences hadn't seen since the Ren and Stimpy show. Nevertheless, the audience loved it. Cow and Chicken would run for 4 seasons on the network. On top of that, it would also get its own short-lived spin-off, I Am Weasel, in 1999 as well. As successful as these cartoons were on the channel, there would be one that would trump them all and make Cartoon Network a bona fide major player. Here it is.
Sugar, spice, and everything nice. These were the ingredients chosen to create the perfect little girl. But Professor Utonium accidentally added an extra ingredient to the concoction, Chemical X. Thus, the Powerpuff Girls were born, using their...
Yes, this is it. The What a Cartoon show, darling. The cartoon that would take the 90s out in grand fashion. Lo and behold, the Powerpuff Girls. To anyone who questions if it's a Hanna-Barbera production, rest assured, it was. Well, sorta. We will get into that shortly. What started as an animation project at the California Institute of the Arts, Craig McCracken would bring to life something that would endear those who've seen it. So much it would become an instant hit from the What a Cartoon series. It's the story of 3 little girls who were made in a lab by Professor Utonium with sugar, spice, and everything nice, and a chemical called Chemical X. This concoction would give us Blossom, Bubbles, and Buttercup, and they would fight crime in the city of Townsville while attending kindergarten, of course. They fought off many villains, but the show's true main villain was always Mojo Jojo, an evil green monkey with the most nefarious plans to take over the world. The Powerpuff Girls was definitely inspired by anime, which by this point was becoming very popular in America with the emergence of Dragon Ball Z and Sailor Moon, and also with the advent of superhero cartoons started to make waves as well. So this was Cartoon Network and Hanna-Barbera's effort to bring the superhero genre to the forefront. Audiences took a huge liking to it. The Powerpuff Girls would usher in a large following to the network and garnered several Annie Awards and 2 Primetime Emmy Awards. It would last 6 seasons on Cartoon Network. Powerpuff Girls would cement the studio in a place they'd seen many times before. Hanna-Barbera Studios finally ushered in the new generation of talent. But unfortunately, things would change at the studio. See, this is where our story stops. Remember when I mentioned that the Powerpuff Girls was sort of an Hanna-Barbera production and I mentioned Cartoon Network Studios? There's a reason for that. The answer lies in the year 2001. By this time, Hanna-Barbera was being phased out as a company due to the merger they had made with Time Warner in 1996. But the real change would come at a great loss. On March 22nd, 2001, William Hanna would pass away from cancer at the age of 90. It was at this point Warner Brothers would dissolve the company into Warner Brothers Animation. Hanna-Barbera was no more. Even though Hanna-Barbera Studios ceased to exist, they continued to live on through Warner Brothers. One thing that can be said is that once Warner Brothers acquired the Hanna-Barbera catalog, they put them to use frequently. Some to good use, others not so good. For instance, Warner Brothers would position Scooby-Doo as their main focus with various home-to-video releases such as 2001's Scooby-Doo and the Cyber Chase, which capitalized off 1996's critically acclaimed home-to-video animated movie Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island. But Scooby-Doo would come back in a different way that would cement him to cinematic history.
I'll have whatever he's having. This place is like uber creepy. Yeah.
Scooby-Doo would finally make the transition from animation to live action in 2002 with Scooby-Doo. Just like the Flintstones before it, it managed to capture the feel of the cartoons almost perfectly, especially with Matthew Lillard's performance as Shaggy, which he was widely praised by critics and audience alike for it. The film had a budget of $84 million and would end up making $275.7 million at the box office. So it's easy to say that the movie was a bona fide success, and that it was. It would do 3 things for Warner Brothers. For one, it would get them a sequel 2 years later in 2004 with Scooby-Doo 2, Monsters Unleashed. Second, it would push Warner Brothers to put out more projects that used their characters such as Yogi Bear, Top Cat the Movie in 2011, and its sequel, Top Cat Begins in 2015, just to name a few. Lastly, Scooby-Doo would come back to the realm he started his reign on, television.
We're coming after you. You're gonna solve that mystery. I see you, Scooby-Doo. We're trying to find you. What's new, Scooby-Doo?
After a 17-year hiatus from television, Scooby-Doo would make his way back to small screens with What's New, Scooby-Doo for the Kids WB Saturday morning lineup on September 14th, 2002. Just like the old adage says, the more things change, the more it stays the same. This is the philosophy that this iteration follows. It's the classic Scooby-Doo formula, but brought to a modern age. In fact, let's check off the list. Mystery Machine? Check. The original crew in said vehicle? Check. Them solving mysteries? Check. Shaggy and Scooby always hungry? Check. Scooby only carrying out with one of Fred's plans to go near a villain for a Scooby snack? Check. Said villain being a person in disguise and telling them she would have gone away with it if it wasn't for them meddling? Definitely a check. In all, it was Scooby-Doo all the way, and it paid homage to Hanna-Barbera's lineage as well. Wouldn't have wanted it any other way, and apparently the audience felt so as well, because it would have a 4-season run on the network. This would be followed by Shaggy and Scooby Get a Clue on the CW. To make a long story short, Scooby-Doo would be their official mascot again. Even to this day, Scooby is still holding it down strong with home-to-video movies and cartoons. Scooby would also appear in the unlikeliest shows on television. Supernatural. Yes, Scooby and the whole gang appeared on an episode of Supernatural, in animated form no less. Mind you, this is a show that was quite dark in nature, but somehow they managed to fit right in the context of that episode. That's the power of Scooby-Doo, I guess. Even properties like Wacky Races would make their return in 2017 for 2 seasons as well. Tom and Jerry also came back with a new anime series called Tom and Jerry Tales in 2006. Up to this point, Joe Barbera actually stayed on board at the newly named studio and helped out with a few of the productions there behind the scenes. But his finest work would be his last Tom and Jerry short, Karate Guard, which he wrote and co-produced alongside the cartoon series. I mentioned that this was his last short for a reason. See, on December 18th, 2006, Joseph Barbera would pass away at the age of 95. In all, Warner Brothers had done right with the properties for the most part. But it isn't the same because the names behind them were all gone. Well, not for long. On April of 2021, new life would flourish for the brand. It was announced that Warner Brothers would revive the Hanna-Barbera brand. That's right, Hanna-Barbera made its return by having Warner Brothers European studio named after them. So I guess everything came full circle. Frankly, I wouldn't have it any other way. So, what is Hanna-Barbera's legacy? Well, it is more than a name or a brand. It is a legacy that was born from the backs of 2 men who grew up without much but had one thing in common, a dream. They decided that together to make something that we would all love, and that was cartoons. They were the epitome of the American dream. They set out to change the way we looked at animation. In turn, they embedded a legacy within us. A legacy that carried us throughout childhood. And when those children came into adulthood, they had children of their own. And guess who was there to nurture them with timeless cartoons about characters who were out of this world, adventurous, humorous, courageous, and taught us to be fun and have it as well. Guess who's there to nurture future talent and inspire them to be the future animators and artists of the world? It was none other than Hanna-Barbera, William and Joseph. Despite the many successes and the many failures they had, they never stopped creating something for us to cherish. In life, we all come and go, but it's the memories that live forever. The memories that we give each other. And cartoons were a piece of our memories. That child that first saw the Rough and Ready show, the Flintstones, the Jetsons, Johnny Quest, Scooby-Doo, the Smurfs, Dexter's Laboratory, or even the Powerpuff Girls, will always remember something from Hanna-Barbera. The memories they had enjoying them. That was Hanna-Barbera's gift to us. A gift that will always keep giving back for years to come. I would love to thank you all for watching. We are finally at the end. This was such a difficult journey doing these episodes, but I loved doing every second of them. Hanna-Barbera and their cartoons were a huge inspiration to me as an artist in life and the creation of this channel. I felt that it was my duty to curate the history of the studio and the lives of these two remarkable men who made a difference in our growth. And as you can tell from these episodes, Hanna-Barbera was a studio that had a long life. And with that came a lot of material. With that said, I apologize for not mentioning the various TV movies they have done over the years. That would have been a long task in itself, but I promise that I am going to touch on them somehow with an episode of their own. Also, if you love the content, please subscribe to the channel and like the video by clicking that thumbs up. I would greatly appreciate it. It helps me out immensely. I really need your help. I want to continue to keep making more content like this for you out there. Also, I would love to give a shout out to these people. And a special thanks to these people as well. Just want to say that this is a passion of mine, and I would love to continue curating animation experience. With that said, this is where I bid you all farewell. Come back as we delve into another piece of animation history on the next episode of The Cartoon Curator. Till then, Godspeed.